take it away, Jim.
Fast forward here. Before I get into the elevator version here of just a snippet, I'd like to put some context to it. I was sitting in the audience yesterday and listening to these people who could not grasp or contain the experiences that they had. And I'm sitting there going, if they can't do it, how in the heck do I do it? And so I'd like to invite people to translate this and the experience that I'll relate as metaphorical that we can apply anywhere in our life. I've worked for the last 20 years with people in crisis, and I've sought out a very small segment of the population that are not only flourishing but have transformed their life in crisis. Yolanda was touching it. I think it's an area IAMS can expand into, and it is something that all of us experience is crisis. There's a transformative quality in crisis, no matter what it is. So I will get into my experience here, and I'd like to see, you can start translating it into your own world and own life. Some of the more transformative experiences of my life have been crisis. They have nothing to do with the OBE or NDE, which put in special classes. When I was born with a congenital heart defect. Didn't until I was a teenager, and I was a climber and a climbing guide, but in my early 20s it started getting worse, and the technology at that time was getting good enough where they felt like they could do a replacement. So at 25 I went through open heart surgery, and we're 58 years old. I don't know why I'm sitting by this guy, but we're both 58 and both been cracked open. And within a year I was back climbing. The doctor said take elevators, but I climbed Rainier several times after that period. It worked wonderful for 30 years, and then I had another open heart surgery 3 years ago. In 1997, the reason I put context to it is that the heart valve had accumulated some junk on it, and it threw a little clot. As it went through my brain, I had a grand mal seizure. My wife sees auras, so she went through a huge trauma. I went through incredible latent experience. She saw my whole aura disappear except for this very thin ribbon for about 20 minutes. My experience during that, I've had other powerful experiences, but I want to share just a little piece of a very extended experience. And that was as I recognized that I didn't recognize I was out of body. I just started experiencing it, being in this void. And I was just in a pure void. There wasn't any reference points to any time or space, really. It was very, very disorienting. But I felt a presence of some sort around me. And that presence slowly coalesced in front of me into light. And I didn't experience a tunnel. I just experienced this incredible, loving light. And it was fascinating. I was just in awe of it because there wasn't anything outside of it. That light contained the universe. It contained all the phenomena and non-phenomena. There wasn't anything that wasn't that light. And the only way I could perceive it was for it to differentiate. There was nothing outside of it. It wasn't like space that we know because it holds objects together. There just was no thing, no time, no space, no nothing. And so it had to create an illusion of separation for me to experience it. And I just couldn't wrap my mind around that, but that's the best way I can describe it. And it started, I don't know if I was moving towards it or it just got brighter, but we came closer. And as I did so, these events would emerge in my life of things that I had been attached to or things that I felt are important to me. And I felt like I was attached to them by cords. And I noticed after this happened a few times that as they dissolved, the light got brighter and nearer and more loving and more encompassing. And by the way, as an aside here, the symptoms I was on disability for several years with heart and brain damage after the 1997 event. those symptoms are increasing. My neurologist explains it that when I turn into an emotional puddle, and he says, well, the emotional system and the thought processing share the same part of the brain. So when it gets over it, you turn into an emotional. So my experience, frankly, is I feel as if the veil is lifting, and it's just too bright to contain. So don't take it personally. This incredible light that just kept getting brighter was still separated from me, and these events and I couldn't remember afterwards what the events were, but I do remember one that I had really sacrificed for it. It was really identifying who Jim is, and it was something I think I really suffered for. As they say, suffering is one of the last things we'll give up. And I remember rearing up in the face of this light, going, I'm not going to give that one up. Even though I knew as I released these things, I was moving towards everything I could ever want. And yet I was still allowing an attachment to keep me separate. Somehow it dissolved anyway, unresolved. Something I get to deal with, I guess, in the future. And this process continued for some time until I got to the edge of the light. And I found at this point I had a sense of my body still. I had my consciousness, but a sense of being in a body that I didn't have for a little while. But it became more apparent as I started merging with the light. And in that mergence, I noticed that my body started becoming the light and becoming the infinite. And that was pretty cool. I kept merging with it, and to the point my consciousness also started merging with it. And I would move far enough into the light that I recognized that if I moved any further, Jim would disappear. That the act of a separate awareness would just totally disappear. Now, we can communicate here because we have the illusion of separation, and it requires that to create in the phenomenal world. What we've done, though, is identified ourselves as that separate being. So who we are and where everything is in the universe is that light, that presence. And so I played on this boundary for what seemed like an hour, merging with it, drawing back, merging with it, and I would get as far as I could, and with this concern that if I did dissolve into it, I would not come out of it, that I would just become the light. The question lingered of, okay, could I go further and still come out? And would Jim die? And I was told by others that spiritual guides later that said, yes, you would have. Your physical body would have died. This illusion of who I am would have died. And I continued to linger there on the edge for some time. And as I recognized that there is also the phenomenal world that I just left, how can I bring this experience back to that phenomenal world? And so I had the comparison of the life now that I had lived in this world in relationship to this infinite presence. And I remember just struggling with how much of this experience can I take back. And I recognized finally that in 3 weeks, this will be largely a memory. I mean, we're relating stories that we can tell you conceptually, but it's a tiny, tiny fragment and it doesn't even touch the experience. You know, it's like telling somebody, you know, giving them a book on love, and if they've never experienced love, no matter how much information you give them, they're not going to get the experience of love.